I really appreciate it because you have your program now, isn't it? So,
Yes.
thank you. Thanks a
It's
million.
no, it's about collaboration will get us there. So, I thank you for asking me.
Thank you so much. Right, so we should be live now on the platforms. Give me 2 seconds. All right. Yeah. All right, so, okay, yes, we're on. Okay, so just a couple more minutes and we'll start.
Is that a real plant in your background there, Eve? Because if it is, it's wearing my most favorite colors. It's very vibrant, yeah.
I won't say.
Don't reveal. Don't say anything.
No. I'm live.
Leave it right there. Leave it right there. Yeah.
I'm very live. As live as the plant. Okay. Right. Okay. So we're going to crack on. Right. Okay. Hi, good evening, Facebook. Welcome to tonight's discussion. Welcome. Good evening, everyone. I can see a couple of persons online. Please remember to share the video and let others know. Just remind them that we're here tonight. This is Eve from Say It Loud with Eve. And we're about to have a very, very insightful discussion on Say It Loud tonight. Welcome. Okay, so we have a lot to cover, so we're going to just crack on tonight. Just over a year ago, we heard about the breakout of a very horrible disease in China. It wasn't horrible then, but as time progressed, we have seen the wrath of COVID-19. On January 30, 2020, the WHO declared a worldwide pandemic. And we've seen and heard about the implications of this disease, including lives that have been lost, serious disabilities. We've seen the social, the economic, and the political, and other implications of this also. We've also seen the development of strategies for dealing with this virus, which include, public health guidance and so on. We've seen the adaptation of various organizations, including public and private sector, the public health and the private sector, to meet public health demands. We've seen more people working from home, still being productive. We've seen significant boost in digital technology and more use of the internet for various purposes. Recently, we saw a short, there was this thing on TV called Parish the Thought, where we had a council meeting that went viral because a fight, a virtual fight erupted online. So much is happening since January 30. And I say this to say that there are advantages and disadvantages to all the changes that this pandemic has induced. And hopefully with time, we'll adapt to this. So tonight, we'll be looking at the coronavirus, COVID-19 in particular, the virus, the variants, the mutations of the virus, and the vaccines. And we'll also discuss some future implications of these. So if you still have doubts, fears, or if you're still a bit ambivalent about taking the vaccine or need some clarity pertaining to any of the three V's tonight, we have our experts, we have our professionals, we have our experts by experience who will share with you tonight some very insightful information. Please like and share the video, and just share it and let other people know that we're here. We're having tons of discussion across social media on this, and it's never too much. And it's very good that we are actually talking. Sometimes we all go quiet when it comes to certain things, but this is vital and relevant and very useful. And we need as much information as we can to help us make informed decisions about our health, okay? Without any further ado, I'm just gonna introduce the panelists tonight. We have Donna Turner. Donna is the founder and she's a lead practitioner of an organization called ANUS, which stands for Another Night of Sisterhood. She's a community learning organization. She's chair of Safer Neighborhood Board for the Borough of Croydon. She's also chair of trustee board of the local primary academy, which oversees implementation of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic culture in the curriculum. Donna sits on 4 separate Central Police Advisory Forums at New Scotland Yard. She is a learning and development consultant at Inclusive Employers and Red Thread, promoting delivery of inclusion through leadership and training. She advocates against violence against women and is a member of both Violence Reduction Network and Violence Against Women and Girls. Most of her work sits within social justice, and her perspective is fed through direct conversations with members of her local community whose feelings are usually at odds with the prescriptive narrative from institutions. So we'll hear from Donna later on tonight. Secondly, we have our guest hailing from across the pond, Professor Wilmore Webley. Dr. Webley is an associate professor of microbiology and the director of pre-med, pre-health advising at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Dr. Webley's work in health has been heavily research focused, mainly on infectious disease mechanisms and the role of specific infections in chronic diseases. He's pioneered work in chlamydia vaccine development and the role of pathogenic microbes in asthma initiation and exacerbations at the Webley Lab. Dr. Webley was recognized in national media coverage for organizing and moderating a panel in 2014 on Ebola outbreak that originated in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, which also spread to the United States. He's made multiple presentations on various groups across on coronavirus pandemic, including radio shows, TV shows, YouTube, and several Facebook Live events. He is the recipient of several awards for his work and roles, and he's also a publishing author of several medical books on infectious diseases and research articles. As part of his current role, he guides and mentors students in order to enhance their competitiveness for admission to medical, dental, physician assistant programs, and other health profession programs. His work has been published in reputable international journals and has made significant contributions to the field of microbiology, vaccinology, allergy, and immunology. His community roles include board member for Big Brother, Big Sister of Hampshire County and board chair for Springfield Seventh-day Adventist Junior Academy. Thirdly, tonight, we have Mr. Neville Watson. Neville's background includes a sales and marketing director for over 20 years. He's a corporate trainer, business and personal life coach, and mentor, a special education needs teacher. He's a community and social activist, a sports spokesman for the national political movement. And he is a nominated 2021 London mayoral candidate. These are our panelists for tonight. I must say and convey apologies on behalf of Dr. Derek Wilson. He has had to make a dash to a meeting with the WHO, members from Team in America, WHO Team in America, and his team here. So unfortunately, he couldn't be here tonight, but he promised that he'll make up for it at some point in time. So, but welcome all, welcome. Tonight, the format of tonight's meeting, we're going to start with a presentation by Dr. Webley on the background of the virus and just an overview of where we were, where we're at tonight with regards to the vaccine, the virus, the variant. And this will be followed by another feedback or a 5-minute overview from Donna and Neville of their experiences through interaction and engagement within their local communities on what they have seen and heard regarding the impact of COVID in their local communities. So at this time, I'm just going to hand over to Dr. Webley to kick off for us tonight.
Eve, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here. Any opportunity that I get to actually speak about this virus, this infection, and what it is doing to our people, I jump at it. And so that's my goal, to basically share as much as I can with as many people as I can as we try to wrap our arms around this really serious infection. So I'll jump right in and say that pandemics are not new to the human population. We've had to deal with pandemics over our entire existence, almost on this earth. And we'll know some of these names, like measles and the Spanish flu and smallpox and the Black Death or bubonic plague. That has really devastated the human population at one time or another. So if you look at a trek through the human population over time, what you'll see is these ups and downs from one pandemic to the next. But the coronavirus, these coronaviruses we've had with us for a while. In the 1960s, this family of viruses were identified by researchers at the University of Chicago. And what they found at that time were these viruses that cause mild disease or the common cold, to the extent that they weren't even given real names. They were just given these alphanumeric codes because the diseases that they caused were just so mild. But 3 times now, we've experienced lethal disease from human coronaviruses. The first was in 2002, 2003, when we had the SARS-CoV-1 outbreak. Leading to about 8,000 people being infected. And even though the numbers seem so small compared to what we have today, this was still a significant outbreak that spread across the entire planet, infecting people in various countries with about a 10% mortality rate. And then, of course, we experienced MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus in 2012. And this is still an ongoing outbreak. Most people don't really know about it or have thought about it because it's relegated to the Arabian Peninsula, since it actually transmitted from bats to camels and then from camels to humans. But what is common among all of these outbreaks, including the 2019 SARS-CoV-2 outbreak, is that the reservoir seemed to be bats. These viruses originated in bats, have some intermediate host. The SARS-CoV-1 had the civet cat as an intermediate host. And once they were able to get rid of those civet cats that were infected, the pandemic kind of just went away. And at that time, for the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, it was kind of a surprise that there was a coronavirus family member doing this. So they started in earnest. Scientists started in earnest to work on vaccines to try and combat this infection at that time. So the family of viruses have a characteristic shape. They have this crown-like look when you look at them, and under the microscope, they look similar. So that's where the name comes from. Corona means crown in Latin. So that's the origin of the name. The disease for this current pandemic is COVID-19, coronavirus disease 19. And the virus that I will mention quite a bit is the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, or SARS-CoV-2. Now, I just want to show you a picture here, Eve, you and your audience, because this is kind of telling of what we're dealing with. This purplish entity that we have here is actually a cell. Okay, and this cell is covered with these yellowish colored dots on it, and all these are viruses. This is the coronavirus. And what it is doing is that it has infected the cell to an extent where the cell cannot handle that. And as a result of that, this cell is actually dying. So these blebbings that you're seeing is actually what we call programmed cell death. This cell is dying by this process called apoptosis. So you can just imagine now this happening on a wide scale in the body as one becomes infected with coronavirus and these cells fall apart. The disease is believed to have started in Wuhan, China. The WHO just finished their trip there, looking at this virus there, trying to determine the outbreak. And one of the things that's common in Wuhan are these wet markets, where you have lots of people selling meats of all sorts, including bats and other wild animals. This is kind of a staple in many parts of China. And I like to show this picture because I think what it shows very clearly is that you could have a big problem apart from all the people gathering together, which could be a way that the virus actually started there, that somebody who was infected actually came to the wet market and spread it to other people who were in close proximity. And then it emanated from there. But it could also have been that it came from an animal there, because here you have a chicken sitting on top of some vegetables, some live frogs here that are also being sold, a cutting board up here that these frogs are going to be cut on after they're slaughtered here along with the fish. And you can see the buckets that are used to weigh, and the scales. They're not very clean in some parts of the market. In other words, this is the type of condition that is ripe for an outbreak. Now, this is a respiratory disease by all parameters. It affects the lungs first. So here's a representation of your lungs. You have the large airway here coming down into the bronchioles and into the alveolar sac, which is where you have exchange of oxygen when you inhale, and carbon dioxide from your body gets spilled back. But this is where you actually have air exchange happening. And these are like bubble wrap sacs. When you feel bubble wrap, that's how this feels. Now, when you have pneumonia from any sort of infection, including SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 infection, these sacs are filled up with fluid, mucus that is being generated through the inflammation in the lung. And as a result of that, you actually have difficulty breathing. And when this goes on for a while, the patient's oxygen levels drop precipitously. And then they might have to go on oxygen in order to spare their lives, or go on a respirator. Now, this infection actually affects all lobes of the lung after it has gone on for a long time, which is kind of different from what most pneumonia causes. Typically, it's one lobe involvement, one side of the lung. And this is an animation from a CT scan from the George Washington University Hospital. And all these areas that you're seeing in yellowish blue are actually consolidation or mucus that is built up in the lungs from SARS-CoV-2 infection. You can see how extensive this is, and it's not even at the end of this infection. So again, I want people to kind of think through the physiology of what is happening when we get infected with a virus like this, because it's pretty invasive. The other thing that they noticed very quickly is that when people got infected, they started losing their sense of taste and smell. And what you're seeing here is that literally at the base of the brain, just in where it's called the olfactory mucosa, and all these red dots here are SARS-CoV-2. It's the virus. You see how close it is to the base of the brain. They haven't shown definitively that it's in the brain yet, but there's no reason to believe it might not be there because it is so close in proximity there. And then you have stuff like COVID tongue, these papular rashes that you see on the tongue, and these indentations that one sees. Very much characteristic now of this highly inflammatory disease. And it comes with a lot of symptoms. And so people mistakenly think that we either have COVID-19 and we get over it, or you die. Well, it turns out that there's this in-between where people recover from SARS-CoV-2 and have what is called long COVID, or these symptoms that continue to linger 3, 4, 5 weeks, months after the infection is over. And it can range from headaches to fogginess of thought to difficulty breathing and difficulty sleeping and fatigue. And it goes on and on and on. People have problems with the heart rhythms and heart palpitations, you name it. So all of these symptoms, people can have combinations of these. And so luckily, we're seeing a drop now in the number of cases going around. And in the UK, you've seen a pretty decent drop over the past 14 days, 45% decrease in the number of infections. But that doesn't dampen the fact that 4+ million people have been infected. Over 118,000, just under 119,000 people have been infected in your part of the world already. And this is an ongoing infection. And you can see that some areas are way more affected than others. Areas like in the lower part of Greater London here, in the Midlands and Greater Manchester area, where tons of people have died from this virus, and people continue to suffer overall. And one of the things we see is that it's disproportionately affected people of color. And what you're seeing here, you're seeing that Black, Caribbean, other Blacks, and Indians have been disproportionately affected. The other ethnic groups here actually include people from the Arab groups in this grouping. And you can see that this is a hugely disproportionate death rate from this pandemic overall. And then for those with underlying conditions, those with diabetes, type 1 and type 2 diabetes have been significantly affected by this pandemic. And when you combine diabetes with older age, which is part of what is probably happening in the Black Caribbean population, that they're typically older, probably have underlying conditions, then you get to the heart of where this disease has actually hit. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the John Henryism theory. And the John Henryism theory is that there was this Black man in the US who he was a steel driving man, and he went up against this machine, and this new machine that was built to drill, and he actually beat the machine, but died immediately after from exhaustion, physically, mentally, overall. And the thought is that this is a part of what is happening. So I'm going to play this video from Sherman James that actually helps to explain this. Really sorry. Let me go back here, get rid of this. Sorry, give me a second. Let's see if I can get this to play, because it really is a good example of what is going on here. Sorry, see now that video is not going to play, but the idea is that as a people, we try to do everything. We African Americans, Blacks in several parts of the world, especially when you leave the Caribbean and other places, Africa, you go to the UK, you want to work to support your family and to send back money for them, and they're dependent on you. So you become the breadwinner of your family. You're working 2-3 jobs in order to make this happen. Little sleep, probably not eating well, So now you have diabetes and are overweight. And then comes this disease that plops right on top of that and exploits the very issues that were underlying. And that now becomes this crisis that one experienced. Now, to make matters worse, as this pandemic has expanded and more people have gotten infected, we've seen these variants. This is not unusual for viruses, especially mRNA viruses, that they're constantly making mistakes as they replicate themselves. The goal of a virus is to make more of itself, is to make tons of daughters, and that's why it infects us. It has no intention to kill us, but it will make more of itself at all expense, including our own lives. And that's typically what happens. And so as it has made these mistakes, unfortunately, it has created some of these variants that seem to be more contagious, like the B1.1.7 strain that they first found in the UK. Doesn't mean that that's where it originated, but that's where it was first found. And then this B.1.351 strain from South Africa, the P1 strain that they found in Brazil. These strains have all shown some level of evasion from regular immunity from the original strain that came out of Wuhan. And then, they just found this new variant. And the thought is that some of these variants might even be more deadly, even though we thought initially that they might just be more contagious. There is thought now and research that shows that they might be more deadly. And if that is actually the case, that now could be a big problem, even with the numbers going down now. If this is really the case and these new variants pop up, we could see numbers spike. The good news is that the current vaccines seem to have efficacy against these variants. So even though the efficacy is reduced, that you're not having this 95% from AstraZeneca and Moderna, that they're still protecting us against these variants. In other words, people who have these variants and get the vaccine, or who get the vaccine and then get these variants, most likely will not end up in the hospital from symptoms because they'll be milder. And that's really the good news at this point in time. Let's hope it stays that way. So when you think about these variants, the reason why they're so problematic is this is actually a cartoon of the spike protein. This is the key that the virus uses to unlock our cells to get in, right? And the mutations are these black balls are showing where the mutations are. So some of them are on the outer part of this, but in where these purple circles are is actually where the key interfaces with the lock on our cells called the ACE2 receptor that it binds in order to get in. That now becomes problematic because if it keeps changing here, this is exactly where the vaccines are being made against that are neutralizing the virus. And so I just want to show you this animation of what happened in the UK from November to December, how quickly this B.1.1.7 strain actually took over. So you see the color change, that's a new strain overrunning the entire UK in just less than a month. And we're seeing a similar thing right now in the US where it's becoming a dominant strain overall. So the WHO says that the two public health interventions that have had the greatest impact on the world's health are clean water and immunization and vaccines. And it says that immunization is a proven tool for controlling and eliminating life-threatening infectious diseases and is estimated to avert about 2 to 3 million deaths each year overall from all the vaccine preventable diseases that we have. Why is it that vaccines work? It's pretty simple, actually, when you think about it. You see, when we get exposed to an infection for the first time, the adaptive part of our immune system, that part that has a memory, that prepares for the second attack, doesn't kick in right away to the extent where it is protective. In other words, it takes about 10 to 14 days. So this graph is a graph over time. And what you're seeing is that as time passes, the amount of antibodies, the protective proteins increase, and they peak around 14 days, right? Well, with a disease like SARS-CoV-2, for many people, especially those with underlying conditions, 14 days is way too long to wait for protection. And so when you vaccinate somebody, look at what happens if we're treating the second exposure as you experiencing the disease after the vaccine. What took 10 to 14 days here now is a 2 to 3 day response. Moreover, you have a higher response the second time around. And that's why vaccines work. That in the first response, you produce these proteins called antibodies, but you also, along with that, produce these memory cells. And these memory cells are actually what gets triggered the moment you see this pathogen again, because it's now in the database of the immune system that, hey, here is something that we saw before. We know we're supposed to make an immune response against it, and you have this bang up immune response. Now, here's the thing: it doesn't matter how well how healthy you are, how many vegetables you're eating, or anything like that. Whatever supplements you're taking, you cannot accelerate this initial response. The only way you can get primed is to actually seeing the bug or getting a vaccine. So that's how vaccines work. And here you can see two patients. These are two young boys, 13 years old. They were exposed to smallpox on the same day from the same source. The difference is that this one was vaccinated, this one was not. So vaccines do work for people who might be doubting the efficacy. And with vaccines, what we're looking for is that we're looking for more than what you see with an antibiotic, where you have an infectious disease, you get treated with an antibiotic, and it goes away, and you are the one who benefit. With a vaccine, the herd benefits, the population benefits. So if you have just a few people in the population, less than 10% who are vaccinated, those in the blue, and you have one infected person, it's very easy for that person to spread this disease around to everybody else. And now you have the whole population coming down with it. However, if you have over 70% of the population protected, and you have somebody coming who is infected, the unvaccinated individuals are protected because of the amount of people you have who are vaccinated from the infection. And as a result, this is what we call herd immunity. And that's the goal of vaccines, that with SARS-CoV-2, what you want are these antibodies that are produced against the spike protein that is used as a key to unlock the cells and get in. And that essentially what you end up having is them blocking it from getting into the cells. That now means that the individual who is infected has lower numbers of viruses, so you're not transmitting it so that other people get infected. So at this point in time, there's several vaccines that have been approved in different countries. We have the Moderna, we have the Pfizer, we have the Russian Malaya vaccine, we have the AstraZeneca, the Johnson & Johnson that is just about to be approved. The AstraZeneca is approved there in the UK and in the EU and other parts of the world. The platforms are a little bit different. But for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, these are mainly concerns for people since they're new platforms. But that's really what it is, a new platform. So just to explain this platform a little bit, here's a cartoon of a cell. This blob in the middle here is actually the nucleus, this purplish blob. That's the nucleus of the cell. And it's inside of here that your DNA lives. In fact, the cell thinks that this DNA is so important that it never allows the DNA to leave the nucleus, so to speak. And so essentially, what you have then is that you have the genetic code to make all proteins, because the body runs off proteins. It is proteins that help us to digest our food. It is proteins that are the enzymes that work in our body. It is proteins that are the carriers of oxygen, for example, like your hemoglobin. It's the proteins that make up your tissues. So proteins are the things that do most of the work in the body. So you have the code to make the protein in the DNA. The protein making factory is actually outside on these ribosomes that you're seeing on the outside here in the cytoplasm. So inside of the nucleus, you have the DNA. Out here, you have the protein making factory. When the cell is ready to make a particular protein, it makes a copy of the gene that codes for that protein. And that is what we call messenger RNA, right? Messenger ribonucleic acid. That now leaves the nucleus through these little pores, come out in the cytoplasm where it's read by the ribosome, and the protein is made and sent out. That's the basic biological dogma. And the way I like to explain it, Eve, is like, let's say you are looking for a special recipe for a special dish, and it's in this rare book that's in your local library. because they only have one copy of the book, they don't allow you to take it out of the library. So you go to the library, you borrow it off the reserve, and you photocopy the pages that you need with the recipe. You bring that recipe back to your house, and in your kitchen, you make that product, whatever meal that is. And that's essentially what it is. That photocopy that you took out of the library is the messenger RNA, right? And so essentially that's how these vaccines are made. So DNA, the central dogma of molecular biology is you go from DNA to mRNA to protein. Transcription, translation, right? The transcript is a copy. Translated means that you're making that product overall. And so now here's a little animation that helps to explain how this messenger RNA.
When the RNA copy is complete, it sneaks out into the outer part of the cell. Then all the components of a molecular factory called the ribosome lock together around the RNA. It translates the genetic information in the RNA into a string of amino acids that will become a protein. Special transfer molecules, the green triangles, bring each amino acid to the ribosome. Inside the ribosome, the RNA is pulled through like a tape. There are different transfer molecules for each of the 20 amino acids shown as small red tips. The code for each amino acid is read off the RNA 3 letters at a time and matched to 3 corresponding letters on the transfer molecules. The amino acid is added to the growing protein chain, and after a few seconds, the protein starts to emerge from the ribosome. Ribosomes can make many proteins. It just depends what genetic message you feed into the RNA.
Okay, so keep that in mind, because when the virus, when SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus, infects us, it does essentially that. It gets inside and it uses our cells' protein-making factory to make the proteins that it needs for its daughter viruses. So essentially, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have just used the same technology, where once the virus was sequenced in China, when they discovered it in January of 2020, they sequenced and released that sequence. All that Moderna and BioNTech did is that they went and they looked at the genetic sequence on the computer. They found what the sequence was, the gene that codes for the spike protein, which, as I said, is the key that unlocks your cells to get in. They took that, got a DNA template from it, and made mRNA from that DNA template in a plasmid in a lab. So it's all synthetic. And then based on what the knowledge they had before, they encapsulated in these lipid nanoparticles. These are little oily droplets that are too small for you to see with the naked eye. Because they had found out before that if you just inject the naked, so to speak, mRNA into the cell would actually destroy it before it gets translated into proteins. So essentially they're protecting it now in these little nanoparticles. It gets picked up by the cell and the cell sees it and say, oh, you want me to make this protein? Okay, let me make it. And it makes copious copies, billions of copies of these proteins, these spike proteins, and release them into the circulation where they're picked up by immune cells. Maybe even the immune cells themselves are making them if they picked up the mRNA. And now the immune system makes antibodies against it in the same way I showed you about the primary immune response. You get primed now for seeing it, and that's how you get vaccinated. So here's a little animation.
mRNA technology has never been used before in an approved vaccine, but scientists are using it now to combat COVID-19. mRNA, or messenger ribonucleic acid, are snippets of genetic code that tell cells to build proteins. mRNA vaccines take advantage of that protein-building process to trigger an immune response and build immunity to SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. Instead of using a small dose of live or dead virus like some other vaccines, mRNA vaccines use a tiny piece of the virus's own genetic material. Here's how it works. This is the virus. These are called spike proteins. Scientists have isolated the genetic code for those proteins, a set of instructions that are put into the vaccine so your body knows how to make them. Your immune system won't make an actual virus particle, but it will make copies of the angry red spike protein. In other words, no gray ball, but an angry red spike. Once vaccinated, your body starts making those spike proteins so your immune system will develop antibodies to fight the real thing. SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that are created for COVID-19 will be the first licensed mRNA vaccines ever.
Okay, so that's the technology. So what's in these vaccines? They have the mRNA that I'm talking about, the code. They have salts, pretty much like normal saline. It's a phosphate buffered saline as a diluent. They have these lipids that are used in combination to protect it. And they have a little bit of sugar, sucrose. That's what that is. So both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, that's what they have in them. Now, these vaccines are very similar in many ways. They're just stored differently for the most parts. The amount of the dose is different as well, the amount of mRNA that you have in each dose. But they both can cause pain at the injection site. They can both cause headache and fever and fatigue and chills, muscle aches and joint pains. These are typical for these vaccines. And a few people have actually had anaphylaxis. They've had this allergic reaction that required an EpiPen from these vaccines while they were going through and giving people them as a distribution. So finally, I want to show you just a little bit of the clinical trial data for this, so you can be comfortable with the analysis of a scientist with this data.
SARS-CoV-2 has caused the death of millions of people globally. Safe and effective vaccines are needed to control the pandemic. The BNT162b2 vaccine is a lipid nanoparticle formulated nucleoside-modified RNA encoding the SARS-CoV-2 full-length spike, modified by 2 proline mutations to lock it in the pre-fusion conformation. In this ongoing multinational phase 2-3 placebo-controlled, observer-blinded, randomized trial, the efficacy and safety of the BNT162b2 vaccine were evaluated. Participants who were 16 or older and who were healthy or had stable chronic medical conditions were randomized 1-to-1 to receive either 2 30 microgram doses of the vaccine or saline placebo, 21 days apart. The first primary endpoint was the efficacy of the vaccine against confirmed COVID-19, with onset at least 7 days after the second dose in participants without evidence of prior SARS-CoV-2 infection, baseline or before 7 days after the second dose of vaccination. In 36,523 participants who had no evidence of prior SARS-CoV-2 infection, 8 cases of COVID-19 were observed among vaccine recipients and 162 cases among placebo recipients. This corresponds to a vaccine efficacy of 95%. Safety endpoints were reported in all participants who received a dose of vaccine or placebo and included specific local or systemic events and the use of antipyretic or pain medication within 7 days after the receipt of vaccine or placebo. In participants 16 to 55 years of age, pain at the injection site, fatigue, or headache occurred in 83%, 47%, and 42% respectively after the first dose of vaccine, and 14%, 33%, and 34% after the first dose of placebo. In participants over 55, pain at the injection site, fatigue, or headache occurred in 71%, 34%, and 25% after the first dose of vaccine, and in 9%, 23%, and 18% after the first dose of placebo. Thus, side effects were somewhat less common in the older vaccine recipients. Most side effects in both vaccine and placebo recipients were of mild to moderate severity. Serious adverse events were noted in 0.6% of vaccine recipients and 0.5% of placebo recipients. The authors conclude that a 2-dose regimen of the BNT162b2 vaccine conferred 95% protection against COVID-19. Its safety profile was characterized by transient mild to moderate pain at the injection site, fatigue, and headache, adverse events similar to those associated with other vaccines. Full trial results are available at nejm.org.
So this is from the New England Journal of Medicine, really explaining point by point all of the data that is there. Finally, mRNA vaccine technology is not new. It turns out that it was a perfect timing. They had worked out all of the problems associated with this vaccine. As you can see, this is a 1992 paper where they're using mRNA technology to replace a protein that was missing in a rat to actually reverse diabetes. Here is a 2017 paper. This is a phase 1 clinical trial of an mRNA rabies vaccine. Phase 1 means that it's in humans already. Small group of people. Here is a 2019 paper with a pandemic flu vaccine, phase 1 trial again. Here is a 2020 paper, April. Moderna again, making a Zika vaccine with this technology. Here is another phase 1 from Moderna for a cytomegalovirus vaccine. What am I trying to show? I'm trying to show that this is something I've been teaching my students for 10 years, mRNA and DNA vaccine technology. It just hadn't reached a place yet where it was commercialized. Here's a paper from Nature in 2018 saying mRNA vaccines is a new era in vaccinology. So this was not something that was developed at the time when we got SARS-CoV-2 on the horizon. This was something that was in place, and it was just utilized, literally a plug and play, until we actually have the vaccines that we have today. And I can talk more about why it is that we're able to complete these vaccine developments in a short time, but I'll stop here so that we can go on with the program.
Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you. So I'm just going to ask Donna to just give us some feedback as to what your experience has been in terms of you engaging with the public, hearing and seeing and feeling the atmosphere around you. What's coming, as it pertains to the virus, the whole pandemic? What are you hearing out there, talking to people?
Firstly, I'd like to thank Dr. Webley for what I found to be a very informative and comprehensively presentation around the virus. It's the first time. I don't know if because Dr. Webley, it's the first time I've taken the time to actually pay attention to a presentation. So there is that to be said, but I found it very informative. And my social media, some of my supporters who are watching are like, but Donna, this guy is good. Like, I'm really learning something. I think what's been missing is the breakdown. So I thank you very much for that as part of your presentation. To return to the question, Eve, obviously using my platform and even conversations off of my platform, there are several strands. So you have some people who have seen the merits in it and are quite enthusiastic about the vaccination and have shown that by taking it. Then there are those who are not sure. Will our kids have to have it? Some people, whilst they don't want it for themselves, they are endorsing within their own families that older relatives have the vaccination. And I think after the presentation I've just seen, I would want that also. But for the most part, I think what it has shown, what this pandemic has done, is it's shone a light on more so than at any other time in my life on the inequalities, especially since BLM last year and the murder of George Floyd. It has shone a massive light on the inequalities in our social, in the way that we live in our society here in the UK, and the lack of distrust. The lack of distrust between a whole range of structures. Here in the UK, we tend to kind of think of the police as the first thing. But around education, I mean, who else has taken the time, and please anybody correct me because I haven't attended that many forums, to kind of break it down in the way that we had here this evening. And so I have to hear that distrust, and I have to hear where people's, the emotion around it. And most people distrust the system, they distrust the National Health Service. And we have seen, we've seen videos, we've seen footage. I myself lost people during this pandemic for want of poor treatment in the care of the NHS. And we could never get a clear answer here in the UK. They told us that we disproportionately die of it, but they didn't tell us how. And I was often asking the question, do we die from it disproportionately at home? Or are we dying from it disproportionately once we enter the healthcare service? So we weren't getting a lot of answers. I think that the distrust is still there. Some people are like, do you know what? If this is going to affect me traveling, Donna, and this is going to affect me going to it. So say me, in terms of my consultancy, a lot of my work is face-to-face. If they say, Donna, you won't be able to work face-to-face unless you take the vaccination, trust and believe I'm going to go and take the vaccination because it's going to mess with my paper. But again, in terms of ethics, I have to join those voices that say that they have a distrust in the system, and based on this, they're not sure. You know, in the UK, when do they ever speak to us about healthy living? Nobody's ever come to us before and had a specific program of healthy living for the Black community around our diabetes and our high blood pressure. They tend to leave us to get on with it by ourselves, to be honest. Now, there's this massive national drive, and we're being not targeted, but we're being singled out along with the Asian community as people that are not taking it and kind of not joining in. And I think that that conversation has to be had. Why is the distrust? Where has it come from? What can we do to fix it so that going forward, people are more likely to understand and also join in and feel that the vaccination is something that they want to do for themselves. I'm quite surprised. I'll say this lastly. For me, this is really telling that I would live to see a time when people of color, when their health is on the line, would still say, I don't want it, even when it's going to directly affect their health. I think anybody looking in and over that, there has to be a further discussion. Even when their lives are on the line in a pandemic, they would rather not have the vaccination. We have to talk about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much. And thanks again. Like I said before, you've given up your show, your program tonight. I want to say publicly, thank you so much for the sacrifice. Neville Watson is our 2021, one of our 2021 London mayoral candidates. So Neville, what's your view?
Okay, initially, Eve, I was going to speak about the emotional, social, and the economic impact it's had on our local communities. But before I do, I need to respond to Dr. Webley, and I need to ask a few questions, but I'm going to answer one of the questions that Donna put forward as well from the church leaders that I've been speaking to. I have 7 GPs in my campaign team as well. So I'm going to give you a hands-on view from 7 NHS doctors who are in my team, my campaign team. I'm not a scientist, but there are a couple of things that have made me question, at least seeking answers to the question. Now, your other guest is not appearing here today. I've listened to a couple of his videos. I did some research also on Dr. Webley as well. And I was listening to a couple of his videos. Your other guest, can I just stress for the audience, had a slightly contrary view to Dr. Webley. I've listened to his video, and he's a professor, I think, from Imperial College as well. Yeah. But then I can't speak for him. I'll just, as a layman, I'll ask a couple of, my own, or the antipathy that I see within my community and the people that I speak to around me. Number one, there's the big T, and we've mentioned it, trust. Trust, both here and the US, the lack of trust. Whether we go back to the Tuskegee experiments back in 1932, I'm not going to teach you your history, you know better than I, that lasted for 40 years to 1972, where Black people, Black men, were systematically, I say infected with syphilis, but certainly what they did then, experimented using Black men. But let's just talk about, of course, we're here in the UK. You see, Dr. Webley, and I suppose I'm going to address you directly. The vaccine, or the injection, I don't want to call it a vaccine because I don't believe it's past the high bar to call it a vaccine. But I'm not going to that. I'm sure that people better qualified than I to go into that. But if this vaccine is the Minerva, it's the answer to all our ills, why does there seem to be, in the UK now, can't speak for the US, a concerted effort to manipulate us into taking the injection? If it was purely for our good, why are we hearing, for example, examples of, if you don't take the vaccine, you may not be able to travel. You may not be able to go shopping. You may not be able to do this, do that. Why are our freedoms being infringed upon during this time? So what it's led me to be suspicious, because I don't need that. I just want to get two sides. But the other thing is, what I found frustrating, I tried to use my own due diligence, use critical thinking, and try to get two sides of the argument, so to speak. Because there are, by the way, and by the way, in the UK, for everyone in the UK, we've been hearing from SAGE with the government, but believe me, there is another side to the conversation. And there is a document, and I know Dr. Webley would know this. You know, there's the Great Barrington Declaration that was put out, and many of you may be aware of it, but I won't go into it, but it was doctors and scientists from across the world who had differing perspectives. But what I've tried to do, I've used the same critical thinking I use if I was buying a car, going on holiday. I look at reviews. I look at contrary reviews. I don't just want to get all the good remarks. I want to get both sides of the argument. So then what I question over here is, why are the social media platforms pulling down opposite views or another perspective? And that makes me concerned. I'm not getting two sides. And that's one of my concerns. But also on the 28th of January, Thursday, the 20th of January, why did you think the European Court of Human Rights had to vote on a declaration, a resolution that's now into law? And I will state the two parts to it. Section 731 says, citizens are informed, no one must be politically, socially, or otherwise under pressure to be vaccinated unless they wish to do so on their own. This is section 3/1. Citizens must be told it is non-mandatory. And the last point it says, it must 732 ensures that no one is discriminated against for not being vaccinated due to possible health risk or for not wanting to be vaccinated. That's now into European Court of Human Rights. So there. Why also, as the companies Moderna and Pfizer been given legal immunity from prosecution? This is a very, very odd, and this is fact, by the way. This government is, because Pfizer they did not want to distribute, I don't know whether the US, but in the UK, unless the UK government gave them legal immunity from prosecution. That's different from indemnity, because it's legal immunity. So these are some of the things that concern me on a personal level. And this is why for me, Dr. Webley, and I respect your perspective, but this is why I have concerns, and the community that I serve, they also have these concerns. Now, you spoke about the efficacy. Well, normally these vaccines, or we call it a vaccine for the want of a better word, they go through 3 to 10 years of animal and human trials. I know you made the point that you've been working on SARS and in the past, but this particular vaccine has been rushed through. It has not gone through the human trials that it normally would have had to go through. So I'm just saying, these are some of the concerns. I'm not saying not to take the vaccine or what, but you can understand these are the concerns being expressed to me and the people that I certainly speak to at the moment. And and there are a number of others as well, but I just want to say that the mental health fallout, and this is my biggest concern, the increase in the mental health hotline calls, domestic violence helpline helplines, and the child line. Sorry, somebody.
Sorry. 1 minute, Neville. Can I just ask the audience, please mute your mics. We are getting a lot of feedback.
So yeah,
Please respectfully, I'm asking, mute your mics. There's a lot of feedback, and this is a live stream. Thank you.
So just there's been an unprecedented increase in calls to mental health hotlines, domestic violence helplines, and childline. And it's what we're going to do about it. So let's go quickly into a solution mode as well. I believe we're faced with the second wave. The second wave is not the coronavirus, but I believe we have a post-traumatic lockdown syndrome that's going to last a lot longer than this year that we've gone through. So I would like to see this government, the UK government, put money into train counsellors to go into schools, colleges. I'd like to see our faith groups opened from Monday right through during the day, where we can have counsellors inside those community hubs. Sorry, you're going to say something, Eva.
And I'm just going to say, we're going to come to that closer to.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to.
What our expectations are.
Yeah.
After all of this.
Yeah, but I just, all right, before we go to that.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about, people also, I'm sorry, Dr. Weberly, this is, people that were hesitant about it. Guess what, in the UK? They were called names. We were called anti-vaxxers. I don't understand that, because if people, now they've toned it down and they're saying we're vaccine hesitancy or, there's no need for that. People just want to be assured and reassured, and they just want their questions answered. And there's been a lot of esoteric language used, i.e. language it's good for you, doctor. You know the language of mRNA and things like that, but we need this broken down into a language that everyone can understand what it means to them, but also understand that once you are vaccinated, it's inside you. That's it. What are the long-term impacts on that if something should happen? Well, let me tell you, the government has also indemnified itself against prosecution. The government have indemnified the NHS and anyone that should give you the vaccination against prosecution. The only people that have not been indemnified, the only people that have not been protected against long-term damage is the likes of me and those, my community, and the people, the everyday man and woman. And so it brings a concern. This is why the concerns are there. And so, I know we have solutions and we'll go into solution mode, but there are a number of issues around this that make it very worrying for me as a Black man, and for those people around me that are asking me questions on my views. And I say this, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Vaccinations have served our people, served the world very well for a number of years. Without vaccinations, where would we be with polio and all the other things? So I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But what I am concerned about is the haste to get through this particular vaccination. It's worrying, it's concerning. And at the moment, when you have a government, and this is the last point, I'll just end on this point. Sorry, on this point. We were first told, Dr. Webley, that from Pfizer, that you get the first injection and 2 weeks later, you were supposed to get your second injection. Our government decided against, and by the way, against the advice of the medical association of the BMA in this country, to increase the second dose, the timeline to 3 months. Even Pfizer disagreed. The BMA have disagreed. But this government have said to get everybody in quickly, you can wait 3 months for the second injection. So it's this type of misinformation. It seems a haste to get things done that is causing the mistrust or the distrust in what is happening. And sorry, I'll just put part there, and I know we've...
Thank you. We're going to come back to your points, Neville. Don't worry. We're going to get there. But we can hear the passion. And I'm sure you're speaking like a lot of people would have been speaking on the program if had they been here. But just generally, Dr. Webley, one of the things Neville just touched on in the last bit of what he was saying was, and I do get a lot of questions from even some of my colleagues at work, was usually it takes up to 10 years for drug, in terms of drug development. And some people see it as a step of the process has been bypassed, especially within England, so that we can kind of, to get MHRA approval of the vaccine. So the question is on a lot of people's minds and tongues is, how come this vaccine was developed so quickly? I know you mentioned earlier that the mRNA vaccines are not new. These have been in development over 10 years or even more, who knows? But, but the fact there's concern about the pace at which the vaccines, within 10 months, that's very quick compared to 10 years. And we can understand, why people are more anxious when they see these things happening. What do you have to say?
First of all, I just want to say to you, Mr. Watson, I appreciate the passion with which you have come at this. I think one of the things that's missing is exactly what you're doing here, Eve. It's the education. Yeah. And that passion that is coming from you is because of lack of engagement over time with the people you represent and with you personally in actually explaining what, to be honest, most of these questions have very simple answers to them. And apparently what has happened is that these things have been left up to people to figure out. And what really needs to happen, and should have been happening way before the first vaccine ever got into somebody's arm, is for there to be a concerted educational effort to explain to people what this really is, how it is being developed, and what are the safety measures in place. Now, let's go to the point that you just asked, Eve. People always say, well, it typically takes vaccines 3 to 4 years or whatever timeline you want to put on it to develop. Who came up with that timeline? Why is that timeline there? Well, I'll explain it to you why that timeline is there. It's because of, number one, red tape and approval. The 90% of it is bureaucracy. The rest of 10% is that the technology that was being used on regular vaccines was not fast enough to get you there. There's no scientist who was going to sit on a vaccine that needed approval and not ask for approval. The technology that we had prior to this to develop vaccines was that you either took the microbe that is causing the disease, you take time to figure out what protein or proteins you want to make a vaccine against. You make either a recombinant protein, that takes a lot of time, or you have the microbe itself makes the protein and you figure a way to isolate it. Once you isolate it, you have to scale up. Scaling up is very time consuming. Once you scale up the production, then you have to go through purification. Then you have to test the different immune adjuvants or enhancers that you're going to give with it and make sure that that combination works. So you're probably going from preclinical back to phase 1 clinical several times back and forth, just to ensure that you have that. Once you get through the safety and efficacy of that process, you go through step 1 to see that it works. It means that you have to have people who are constantly being infected in order for you to see if something works. The reason why we don't have a vaccine against SARS-CoV-1 is because it kind of just disappeared. After a while, it just went away. You can't test a vaccine on something that's not actively ongoing. So there are some major points here why these vaccines were made in such a short time.
But,
Number one.
Sorry, Doc. One of
Yeah.
the other, just on piggybacking on that,
Mhm.
one of the other thing was another thing right in here is that you know, a notion that cancer has been around for ages. Other infectious diseases have been around for ages. Why not an mRNA vaccine then? Why
Right.
all of a sudden?
Because you can't make, cancer is not one disease. Cancer is over 200 different diseases with two characteristics that link them. Cells that are growing out of control that has acquired the ability to metastasize. A breast cancer from person one is not breast cancer from person two. You're talking about very different mechanisms of how it starts. An infectious disease like your SARS-CoV-2 has a single way to get inside of a cell. You target that single way, you can stop it. For a virus like HIV, billions, maybe trillions of dollars have been thrown at it, and we're still not able to get a handle on it. Why? Because it mutates so rapidly. This virus does not. This virus actually has a proofreading system. So what we sometimes see as being rushed is actually a little bit of luck mixed with perfect timing over the mechanism. But let me finish my train of thought here, because I think it's important. So the first thing that caused this vaccine to run so quickly is the technology. mRNA doesn't require any of that processing that I've explained. You get the sequence from a computer, you synthesize the mRNA in a lab, you take that, you encapsulate it, and you put it in. So that is why it took 2 months from the time when the sequence came out to when the first human trial happened, because it literally is a plug and play. The second thing is that in a pandemic, there is a process for emergency authorization. In other words, if you get sick at home and you call the ambulance, you wouldn't expect the ambulance to stop at every stoplight, to sit in traffic before it gets to you. There is a system in place for that ambulance to drive down the road, carefully go through the traffic lights, and get to you in the shortest possible time. That's what emergency use authorization is. We're in a deadly pandemic that's killing a lot of people. The third thing is that once they saw that there was efficacy in phase one, in other words, safety in phase one in a small number of people, they immediately started phase two. So phase one and phase two overlap because they're both looking for safety, and then you're looking now for efficacy in phase two. Once phase two showed that the dose that they were using was safe, they overlap phase two with phase three. Now, phase three is the real deal. Phase three is your double-blind, placebo-controlled trial where you have tens of thousands of people in it. And what you're trying to see is between the people who got the placebo and the people who got the vaccine, are you having differences in side effects, differences in adverse events, but also differences in protection? Once they saw that, so the phase one, phase three clinical trial wasn't even over. In fact, the moment they started phase three, they started manufacturing. In a normal vaccine development, you would never do that. Why? Because the companies that have invested would never allow a company to run a phase three clinical trial at the time when you're manufacturing the vaccine. However, because the government put the money up, here in the US, the federal government put a ton of money up. Other governments already pre-ordered the vaccine. They were able to start manufacturing so that the moment they got good results from phase three, they were able to go to emergency use authorization. And once they got that, they could start distributing vaccines. All of those processes under normal circumstances will be discrete processes. However, no steps were skipped. And that's important. Not a single step. In fact, the same rigorous review of the data that I just played the video of, showing you how this data was reviewed. Moreover, in this pandemic, I mean, I'm a scientist. That data is like reading a storybook to me. All of the data has been fully analyzed, not just by the FDA, but by scientists, tens of thousands of us all over the world. If there's something there to be caught, it would be caught. But here's the thing, Eve, as minority people, We've suffered the indignities of being experimented on, as Mr. Watson mentioned, for years, for decades, for hundreds of years. The gynecological procedures that have revolutionized treatment of women today were actually practiced on Black women without anesthesia. Henrietta Lacks's cells were taken from her without any mention that they would be commercialized and used in different ways for people to do experiments on. Her family didn't even know. You mentioned the Tuskegee syphilis study, where for over 40-something years, men were allowed to have syphilis ravage their bodies while antibiotics that could be treated them were there. So the PTSD that we're suffering is real. However, how do you overcome that? How do you get past that? You get past that with education. And education says, here's the thing, Mr. Watson, no vaccine that is in use has ever had any vaccine company taking liability for any adverse events. It's just the way vaccines have been set up. It has never, ever happened for any vaccine in the history of vaccine development. In the US, we have what is called the vaccine court, where if people felt that they've had adverse events from a vaccine, they go there, they present their cases, independent body reviews it, and there's government funds that they get compensation from. No company has ever taken that on. And so when we say these things sometimes, it gives the impression that there's something nefarious going on with this vaccine that isn't. And so that's my pushback on that. But what I want to say is that I agree with you that coming and saying that people are anti-vaxxers is not true. I've met a lot of people who were vaccine hesitant for various reasons. And once it was explained to them, once the science was explained to them, nobody's here trying to kill off a race of people or a group of people with a vaccine. And what you say that the vaccine is staying in your body, that's also not true. An mRNA vaccine is a transcript, it's a copy of instructions to make a protein. Once it gets inside of a cell and the cell reads that instruction, the message itself is destroyed. Think Mission Impossible. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Within hours of it being read, that messenger RNA is destroyed. The proteins that are produced from that instruction are also destroyed. Right? That's how the immune system recognizes the protein. It doesn't recognize as a blob. It breaks it down and reads the amino acids of it. And that's how you make an antibody response. That protein gets degraded by the enzymes of the system. And within weeks of having been vaccinated, you go and you check somebody for breakdown products of that protein, of that spike protein, and you won't find any. So within 2 months, 3 months that people are worried about, there is no protein in the body from the spike protein, and there's no mRNA, right? They're all degraded. That's the way the body deals with stuff. Our own proteins that we make in the body, after they've been made, they have a shelf life. They're gone. The FDA did a study where they went back and looked at the last 50 years of vaccines that have been approved. You know what they found? They never found any major side effects from vaccines after 2 months had passed. After 2 months of getting that second dose, no major side effects have been shown. And so essentially that is why these companies waited for 2 months before they even asked for emergency use authorization. They committed to doing that. There are people who have gotten these vaccines since March of last year, first phase of the clinical trial. So that is the extent of how long we know that people have gotten the vaccine. Nobody's growing any heads, nobody's falling over, dying, because vaccines don't do that. And when you understand the science behind this particular type of vaccine, you'll understand that there is no way it can do any harm in this way, because it's just a piece of message and it produces a single piece of protein.
Thank you so much.
I hope that helps, Mr. Watson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just to include the audience here, I've seen quite a few questions here. One of them, someone is asking, how different is the COVID vaccine from the flu jab? What's the difference between the two? I can't hear.
They're different in many ways. Yeah. The flu vaccine is on a completely different platform. It's a subunit vaccine. In other words, you take proteins the hemagglutinin and the neuraminidase proteins from the different flu viruses, and you combine them and you use that with an adjuvant to enhance the immune response. You inject it into somebody. This messenger RNA platform is very different. It takes a message, transcript of the protein that you want produced, you inject it in, and it's able to make that protein. The flu vaccine is also different in that you have to get it every year because you never know which strain you're going to get, right? Luckily for us, even though we're having variants of the COVID-19, we don't have any big variants of it because it turns out that it has what is called a proofreading system. Like you're typing in Word and you have the spell check on, that's kind of what it has. So when it makes mistakes, most of the mistakes are corrected. And so the small mistakes that it's making, it turns out that it still has to bind, the key still has to fit in the lock of the ACE2. And as long as it's doing that, that's where the antibodies are binding and blocking it.
Thank you. And I'm now coming to a troubled area in a minute, Donna and Neville. I'm coming back to the what you flagged earlier. But just before that, Doc, how, in terms of the variant, why just very quickly, I know you mentioned this in your presentation as well. Why do mutations occur? And how dangerous are these? And finally, what does this mean for the vaccines that we have now?
Yeah, so mutations happen because the enzyme that the virus uses to add nucleotides as it's making new strands is not very smart. It makes lots of mistakes, right? It's not very accurate. And so this inaccurate system, it's the same type of enzyme that HIV has. However, as I said, the virus actually is a proofreading system that seeks out these mistakes and corrects them. But even with that, even with your spell check on, you still make mistakes, even though they're not as plentiful. And so when the virus makes these mistakes, sometimes it causes that strain that the mistake is made to die off because it can't properly attach back to the cells. But every now and then it gets lucky and it creates a mutation that allows it to bind more tightly to the ACE2 receptor or to infect a little better. And that one outpaces the other strains that are in the population. And so it becomes a dominant strain overall. And that's really what these mutations are. Now, where the vaccines are concerned, clearly, if you have a mutation, you're going to have a reduction in the efficacy of the vaccines. But what we've seen, and the report just came out yesterday, actually, that all of the vaccines that we have now are effective against all of the variants that we have, not to the same level, right? So it's essentially you're having a 95% protection from Moderna and Pfizer. Well, when you have a variant like the B.1.1.7 variant and your South African variant, that protection might go down to 80-something% or 70-something%. But here's the thing. We're still not seeing people getting hospitalized, which means that it's reducing the viral load enough to protect you from actually having adverse, significant events that will land you in the hospital. And so that's the good news for now. However, with the mRNA vaccines, what they're doing now, they've gone back, and Moderna is already doing this, creating a new strand of mRNA that will protect you against the variants. Because again, this is pretty simple from an mRNA vaccine because all you have to do, you just have to make another plasmid that has that sequence and you can now put it into a vaccine. So people could actually get a boost if one of those strains actually overtook a population. If the strains are not overrunning the population, then you don't need to do that with a booster.
Okay, so have these variants, have they changed, the structure and function? Have they significantly changed? Have they,
No, they all that has happened is that, proteins are made up of amino acids. Mm-hmm. And so for some of these variants, you have anywhere from 2 to 8 amino acids have been changed in a protein that has tons of amino acids, right? And so with the change in these amino acids, it allows the spike protein to bind more tightly to the ACE2 receptor. Yeah. And it probably now has a stretch of amino acids that have changed that doesn't have an antibody that has been produced against it, so it can't neutralize it. But you have other areas in the binding domain that have neutralizing antibodies against them. So you have that protection from it because it's not just one protein. It's not just one type of antibody. This is a trimer of a protein that has a binding domain and has several different B cells that have recognized it and several different clones of antibodies being produced.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Someone asked a question, but I'm just going to tweak it a little bit. The mRNA vaccines and how do these differ from traditional vaccines? And does it negate the need? Do these vaccines negate the need for guidance, the guidance set out by our governments, whether in the UK or in the US?
Well, no vaccine negate need for guidance, right? That's why they all have to get authorization. Yeah. In other words, you have a board of scientists that look at these vaccines, they look at the technology, they look at the data, they look at the side effects, they look at the risk versus reward ratio, because that's what you do with medication, right? And that is why I agree totally with Mr. Watson that you can't force people to take a vaccine. A vaccine is a medication. And if I can refuse to take a cancer drug or an antibiotic or whatever else, I should be able to refuse to take a vaccine. No government should impose on a population that you must take a vaccine. Even though we know how important it is that a significant proportion of the population take a vaccine in order to protect against, to get this herd immunity. But essentially, that shouldn't be something that you actually look at. So with these vaccine platforms, we have the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, which are the only mRNA vaccines in the plot. But the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines are very different platforms. However, they're going after the same thing. They're looking to make antibodies against that same spike protein, that same key that unlocks the cells, because that's where you have what are called neutralizing antibodies. And that's what you want. Antibodies, these are Y-shaped proteins that are able to bind to the spike protein of the virus and prevent it from attaching to the cells. So for the J&J vaccine and for the AstraZeneca vaccine, what they do is that they get a Trojan horse virus that doesn't cause disease in humans, called an adenovirus. They gut it off its ability to replicate, and they put in the gene for the spike protein in it. So when it infects you, it makes that spike protein, among other proteins that this virus has, but it makes copious amounts of this spike protein, releases them, the body sees it, makes antibodies against it. Those antibodies are circulating as well as memory cells in pretty much the same way that the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine does it. Yeah. And you have that protection. We have examples of these types of viral vectors being used. For example, the Ebola vaccine that was approved a few years ago, that's a viral vector vaccine, right?
Okay, thank you. For this is an open question, and we've, Neville's mentioned it big time before. Don has touched on it. We know there are marked inequities and disparities in terms of how healthcare is accessed, especially when it comes to the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic group, and this is the same for the US as the UK, and predates COVID. I think we're going to talk about hesitancy in a little bit, but there are obvious systemic and structural racism in terms of how, I work in the healthcare sector, I've seen things, in terms of accessing healthcare by these communities. How do you think, and this is an open question to everyone, how do you think either of these, the systemic and the structural racism, play into COVID? Are these reasonable explanations for the disparities that we're seeing? Do you think this will further compound or widen the racial health inequities within our communities? If you do, what can the government do to help improve this? Are we just using a race card? Are we just using the victim mentality and just constantly blaming racism on everything as it pertains to us? I know it's a loaded question.
Yeah, but when you look at the question, what has happened is that I think what COVID has done is that it's torn apart the veneer, the coverings of the divides that we always knew were there, and sometimes we didn't know how big the chasm was. Now, look at even the beginning of the pandemics where testing is concerned. You have people who have to go to get tested, But the sites that they have to go to get tested, they need to have transportation to get there. And so the people who are wealthier are able to drive their vehicles there. The people who are not, who are in the lower socioeconomic class, which unfortunately are predominantly people of color, are not able to go get tested. So they don't know for sure that they're positive for the virus, so they transmit it to people. Moreover, when you look at jobs, people who are underrepresented, your BME people, are the ones who are having jobs that are forward-facing. The service jobs, people who are bus drivers and who work on the train, who clean the hotels and all of those places, people work in grocery stores and have to face people, they are going to be disproportionately exposed to the virus. And their service, what they do, is essential. But at the same time, they don't have the level of healthcare typically that they need. So they've never really been going to the doctors unless something is really wrong. And some of them don't know that they have underlying diabetes. They don't know that their hemoglobin A1C has been up. They don't realize that they have an underlying heart condition. Sometimes they might suspect it, but because of this fear of science and healthcare and medicine, you hear even Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean people say, well, I don't want to go to the doctor. I don't want them to tell me anything that's wrong with me. And so they sit until it gets really bad. That's why many times, even something like cancer is caught in us when it's in phase 3, stage 3, stage 4. And so these inequities get magnified when you have a disease that ravages your body in such a short time and kills so rapidly. With these underlying conditions, we know that people who have diabetes have a significantly increased number of ACE2 receptors, which is the lock that the virus uses to unlock our cells to get in. With that, of course, because you can more readily get infected, because excess sugar in the blood is fuel for these viruses to replicate and also stalls the immune system, the physiological impacts are compounded and you see this divide. And so this is systemic racism on display, where the systems that have been set up for school, for work, for transportation have been disproportionately not benefiting people of color for many, many years. They weren't set up to benefit people of color. And as a result, in a pandemic like this, you have this. However, it's interesting, Eve, because it turns out that the great equalizer of these inequities is actually a vaccine. Vaccines are made cheap enough that it doesn't matter who you are, you should be able to get it. It is the great equalizer.
Thank you. Donna.
Yeah.
Donna, are we just pulling the race card? Are we just blaming everything on racism?
No, I think that Dr. Webley has answered much as I don't think that we are just pulling the race card. You can't hide from the disproportionality that you see. A lot of our frontline workers are from the wider African diaspora, but might be living here in the UK. A lot, all of the things that he said, I'm not going to repeat what he said because he knows what he's talking about. We do tend to fill those fields of work. So we are the ones who are immediately almost, infected. I think I do agree that it's structural racism because, I have never seen, and again, I'll be corrected on this because I don't know everything, but I haven't seen a almost side-by-side plan or forum or program from the NHS that does that type of, education around diet and whatever within the Caribbean community, within the different ethnic communities that exist in the UK. From my understanding, we tend to kind of find these things out ourselves, or independent practitioners from that community come back and deliver to the community. And I think that is part of the racial inequality that we're all lumped in together. Well, actually, we are all different. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a black person. I think that there should be this level of education. I think education is actually at the heart of what we've been talking about this evening. Yeah. Education, not just to understand what's been presented, but education around our own health. We are in this country, you know, England is one of the most classist places in the world. Mm-hmm. We still run on the old classist doff your cap kind of hierarchy. So we are a nation of service providers. We provide the services for the people who sit at the top. So the need for education hasn't really been apparent. We've almost, that's what you're told to do. So we're in a pandemic. This is the vaccination you need to have. Go out and take it without thinking. And I think there's a new day dawning where people are like, well, hold on a minute. Before you tell me to rush out and take the thing, tell me about it first. I wish to be educated around this. And I think that, and I see that not just here in the UK, but also further afield. People are saying, whoa. Just because you say doesn't mean that we now do. Tell me what it is. I want it to be broken down for me. So I think that, again, the lack of education is, again, another tick box for the structural racism, because they don't believe us worthy of it. Why do we have to inform them? And I think it's racist and classist. So for me, you know, it's not just about race. Of course, it is to do with racism, but it's also because we live normal, you know, most of us live in the lower socioeconomic groups. That's where we kind of hang out and are. It's not just about race, it's also about our class. Because we are not educated and we don't have the know-how, we're not supposed to ask questions, which is why, Eve, platforms like yours, mine, Eddie's are so great at educating our people and informing them. And by having practitioners on like Mr. Watson and Dr. Webley, what that does is it allows that, you know, I don't have the answers, but what it allows is people in their homes, and my WhatsApp's been picking up, you know, Dee, you know, what was said by Dr. Webley, that makes sense. He's really informative. Also, people have equally said, you know, what Mr. Watson said is true. You know, these inequalities and blah. So it's getting the conversation going. That's what's important. Mm-hmm. Being more engaged and having the conversation and being educated about the choices that we make.
Yes. And Neville, we've heard all of that. Now, from a, what do you think, or how do you think the government? We've seen little efforts being made now, but and you know, we appreciate everything, and it's never too late, you know. But from a government standpoint, how can the government help when it comes to these inequities within our healthcare system as it pertains to the BME population?
Firstly, I'm going to slightly take this conversation on a different path. I do not believe there is any sort of racism connected to this particular subject matter. I don't think it fits into this. I think there's actually a reverse racism going on here, because it's the first time that I, in my lifetime, have known a government wanting to put the Black community at the head of the queue. In America, currently, there's a term they're using at the moment. It's interesting. They call it, in the name of racial justice, in the name of racial justice, why Black people should be getting vaccinated very early. It's interesting that Black people are being seen and cared for in such a wonderful way, being coerced in a way to get in this vaccination. So I don't see racism as being a topic relevant to this particular conversation. I respect there is problems within the NHS, and I've got many friends in the NHS. I told you, my team is filled with NHS doctors, and we talk about this all the time, Black, Asian, English as well. And so I know that goes on, but that's a different subject for me, personally, for a different, another day. But there was something I needed to ask, because it was skipped over in the getting the vaccination to market. The human trials, and that's the bit that Dr. Webley did not touch on. These vaccinations normally go through, and forget about the money. Yes, there's been money pumped in, of course. Listen, we know that Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation have pumped billions into the WHO and vaccination. We know all about that. The billions have been pumped in. We know that. There's money pumped in from all sources. But the human or animal, then human trials were not done. They were not conducted, not over a long period of time. The period of time would be 3 to 5 years, because that's how long it takes for you to see the outcome. So just to say that wasn't there. And also,
Mr. Watson,
I'll just finish up my point, Fish.
Because you see, this is what happened.
I need to finish the point first, though. I didn't interrupt anybody.
Right, I'm sorry, but you go, and then I really don't get a chance to answer your point.
No, because I need to just finish the...
Neville, can you just let him answer part A of your thing, and then you continue? Just give him a chance to answer part A, and then... Because he misses the question each time, because some of your first questions, I think they got forgotten, because there were quite a few. So give him a chance to answer A, and then you just...
Human trials, okay.
Yeah, so this first one here, yeah.
It is not true that human trials were not done, and it is totally false that human trials...
Over what period of time were they done?
They were done over the 1 year period, sir. I mean, what I just presented to you, you see, you're making an assumption that you don't have information for, sir.
I do, sir. I do.
Yeah,
No, I do. I do have the information.
You're making an assumption that there is a stated timeline for human trials to happen that is set in stone and that has been defined, and that is totally not true. The reason, and I've explained this before, the reason why these trials took the time that they took was because of all the parameters I described. You can't finish a human trial before enough people statistically, using a power analysis, have been infected. If you don't have a pandemic like this one that's raging, where so many people are getting infected, you have to wait months to years for enough people in the trial to get infected so you can run the statistics. Because of how many cases of coronavirus we're having, the trials were finished very quickly because enough people got infected so that the overseers of the trial could say, yes, now we have 200 people infected, or now we have 170 people infected. Let us unmask the trial to see who is in the vaccine group versus who is in the placebo group. If you were doing that with another virus that wasn't infecting at this rate, you would have to wait several months to several years to get the same numbers infected. This is really important. That is what takes the time. And so there is no prescribed 3 years, 5 years, 10 years for vaccine development. I work on vaccines, right? I know this stuff. I'm not trying to read some papers on it. I'm talking about what I actually know. So it's really important that we get that straight.
Okay. So would you then be surprised then to hear that I can tell you of eminent scientists like yourself who do not share your view, who have the opposite? Now, would you be surprised to hear?
I would not be surprised, because people keep going.
Wait a minute, just let me finish the point.
Go ahead, Neville, go ahead.
The point I'm trying to make here is this. If we have scientists, eminent scientists like the Dr. Webley, on both sides of the debate, which we have, by the way, for everyone listening, we have. Do not, for 1 minute, because our other guest was supposed to be on this broadcast today. He would have given you a slightly different perspective, but he's not here. But I'm telling you today, we have eminent professors, scientists, as eminent and as qualified as Dr. Webley, because I tell you, I've read them, listened to them as well, who have a totally opposite view. And this is the point. It's not saying right or wrong here. It's just giving people the option of, or the opportunity to hear two sides of a perspective. Right. That's all I'm saying. We in this country have not been allowed, because there's been a sort of totalitarianism attitude towards any other perspective other than the one that SAGE is giving us. This is scary by even my own doctors in my own team tell me they have been silenced. Dr. Webley, let me say again, I'm going to repeat to you. They have been silenced for their view. Fact. Why would they say that? They don't make that up. They're not making that up. So I'm saying to you, why the need to do that? If it was as honorable and full of integrity, you would let every side speak. You would hear two sides of it. You would, if we had another side, a professor on, another doctor on that can articulate exactly the way you could, but he had a different perspective as yours. Yeah, okay. I'm not saying that either right or wrongly. I just want clarity from both sides. I want people to have the opportunity to hear both sides. That's all. That's all I'm saying. I'm not disputing what you know. You've spent years studying and what you know. But I'm telling you today that I have people around me today that I speak to on a regular basis. Please, I say this to you. I don't have to make the time, and I'll be saying this as I go around London over the next few months, that actually speak as eloquently and have the same qualifications as you, who actually, Dr. Webley, they have an opposite view to yours. So if that's the case, could you see as lay people, the difficulty we have if we have these two different arguments going on from well-qualified professionals, Black and white and Asian. So that was the point. The other thing I just want to say to you is that, can I say, Bill Gates, only last week, he has stated categorically, this is what Bill Gates said. He said, he made a comment. He feels that we would need, he recommends we take a third jab now. That's what Bill Gates, we will need a third jab. This is what he's talking about to really get this thing down. So he wants more. So as the variants, you know, they, as you say, mutate and whatever, does it mean, and you've just said the one jab will look after all the variants? Well, actually, there's disputing that. There's a dispute around that. It said that we will probably need to probably get a jab every year. They're saying actually, and I'm sure people listening will know this, they're going to mix the flu, potentially mix the flu jab with a COVID jab, so you can get it each year. That's already been spoken about in the UK, by the way, Dr. Weberly. So these are the things that's leading confusion, concern. And, you know, just say, you know, I just want to, on my part, finish on this. I know this was around the vaccines. It was around there was the 3 V's, vaccine, variants, and?
The virus.
Virus. Well, I just want to close on this. As a Christian, the victory. And that's, I'm going to keep it on that, because I still feel we have the victory. So I just say on there, to my mind, the case has not been for me one on either side. For me, I'm still looking at all the information. I want my people to have all the information. And I think Donna, absolutely correct. It's about education, but education means we're getting it from both sides. We must hear the full picture, not part. If I'm having a dispute with my wife, and then some third party comes in and I give my perspective of why we're arguing, they will no doubt say they want to know what your wife's perspective. There are always another perspective and we need to hear it. And I would say continue to beat that drum. We need to get two perspectives, and it's out there, but it's been suppressed. It's been taken down by the media companies. And I just want to understand, Dr. Weberly, why are they doing that? If it's pure, if it's full of integrity, why are they pulling down other views? And it's been done, I can tell, factually, that's been done. And you know it as well. Why?
So I don't work with a media company, but I can tell you.
Facebook, Instagram, they're all doing that, by the way. It's a fact. It's a fact.
The reason why they're doing this is the part that you haven't talked about. That there is a huge anti-vaccine movement that have been posting stuff that is false and that has been scientifically proven to be false for decades. Here's the thing. I have been on a platform with Dr. Garrick Wilson, who was supposed to be here.
Yeah.
And in the last presentation that we gave together, we were in full agreement about what I'm presenting here. In fact, we were just 1-2 off each other. So I would be very surprised if Dr. Wilson would go against what I just presented here, because it means that he would be going against the science that he was taught. You see, that's the difference. When I come to this type of conversation, I come to it with very little emotion. I come to it with pure science. And here's why. Because in my opinion, if I teach you the biology, if I teach you about how the vaccine is made, if I teach you about how clinical trials are made, you will be informed enough to make your own decision. And I think what needs to happen with leaders at every level, whether it's your pastors, your guy running for mayor, your city councilman, I think everybody needs to take a deep breath, learn the science. Learn the science. It's not too difficult to learn. We're smart people. Let us not get so worked up that all we're doing is throwing stuff around, because that is what brings confusion. And that is why when I come with evidence. I come with the science. I show you the biology. And when you get the biology, because you see, two sides can't be right about this.
Have you taken the vaccine?
Let's be real.
Have you had the vaccine? Have you been vaccinated?
I don't have the vaccine because I'm not in the age group. Okay. But the moment my turn comes, I'll take it. Yeah. My wife, as a healthcare worker.
Dr. Garrick was named. He said in his last video he would not take the vaccine.
No, but he came back in his
video.
Actually, that's the first one you saw. In the meeting with Dr. Webley, actually clarified that and made it very clear to people that, and in the first one, he said he was waiting on data.
There you go.
The second one with Dr. Webley, he made it very clear to people, because there were a lot of questions, that he will take the vaccine when it comes to the time, and he stated why. Now, he's not here, so I don't want to go on and on with Dr. Garrick.
Here's the thing.
Okay.
What I'd like to do is actually, Dr. Webley will speak. Sorry, I'm coming, but we'll try and arrange another meeting, and because I don't think we are even addressing some of the questions that needs to be addressed tonight, but but carry on, Dr. Webley.
Here's the thing. Before, what happened with this vaccine development initially over the summer concerned me. And what concerned me was the politicization of the vaccine development. Because I'm a scientist. I think science. I want to see the data. And when people started putting timelines on when the vaccine should be out and when it must be out, that concerned me. And I waited for the science. I waited for the data. I read through every line of the clinical trial data myself. I'm a part of a group of very good vaccine scientists who I listen to and who I interact with via social media and by phone. We came to a consensus that based on the data presented, these vaccines are safe and efficacious. And for every new vaccine that has come out, we have used the same parameters, stringent scientific rigor to look at it and determine whether or not it's safe. There are no two truths here. So when we talk about listening to both sides, we can listen to both sides, but if a person is not informed, they can't come to a decision as to which side is correct. That is why I present the science, and I present the science in simple form. That is why I take this stance. And when I give these presentations, I have no interest in the vaccine company. I get no money for doing these things. I don't take anything for doing what I do. I do it because I know it's important to my people. It's important to people to know the truth. And yes, I haven't yet gotten the vaccine, but it's not because I don't want it. It's because I'm in no category here in the United States right now that would give the vaccine. As I was saying, my wife has gotten both doses of the vaccine. She's totally fine. She's a frontline healthcare worker, and she is totally fine. I would not advise my wife to get a vaccine that I didn't believe in. She came to me. We had that discussion. Is this vaccine safe? Is it efficacious? Not only has my wife gotten it, but tons of friends and family members that I have gotten the vaccine. I trust the vaccines that are out there right now. And if one comes out that I don't trust, I will be the loudest mouth in the conversation to say it's not. What I want from our local leaders is to inform yourselves, take time to learn the science. I'm doing this right now with a local Black coalition in my area where I'm going through presentations, one-on-one conversations with people, answering all of their questions. Because you see, what happens is that sometimes when we get overly worked up, we don't hear, we don't listen, we don't get the information. And when you get the information, as you piece it together, you can now start informing people about what to do, what you understand, and get the right information. All of us as scientists, the fact that somebody has a PhD in something doesn't mean that you know what I know. I study immunology for a living. I teach it every single day. So I know this stuff. I know at the molecular level what is happening. Not everybody who is an MD or is a PhD understands this stuff. There are lots of people who are straying out of their areas of expertise and talking about stuff that they don't fully understand. That's not the case with me.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Donna, what do you think has, we mentioned a bit, but I think we can go a bit more in depth with this. What do you think has, we talk about the systemic and the structural barriers, the structural racism that contributes to COVID, but what do you think contributes to vaccine hesitancy within our population? And do you think disinformation has played a very poignant role in this?
Well, for those of your listeners that would have seen me on Eddie Nestor's show on Sunday, actually, one of the things that I learned, and I didn't know this before, was that at the beginning of the pandemic in the UK, we were told that Black people couldn't get it.
Yeah.
And then we were told it didn't survive in the heat. Mm-hmm. And then the story has changed. And again, and I do have to say, I agree with Dr. Webley on this feeding of misinformation. Yeah. I'm going to speak the plainest.
Yeah,
and it doesn't apply to everybody. So I don't want anybody in there who's a bit bougie saying, how dare she imply that? We are a people of, village lawyers and barbershop scholars. Yeah, for the most part. We tend to listen to the information we receive informally. Now, I'm not saying that's true for everybody, but I think in the places and spaces and levels of the society that need to and want to have this conversation, often there are challenges because nobody's really reaching out into those communities. Yeah. Nobody's having those conversations in layman terms that people will understand. Tonight, and I'm not here one way or the other, but what I did appreciate about your presentation, Dr. Webley, was that it was in vernacular and when, that was relatable to me. So you used a couple of examples, analogies, as you presented. Listen, my people need them kind of language because that we understand. Yeah. We don't. I'm not a scientist. I don't. I'm an educated woman by far. But when it's not my field, I tend to stay in my lane. I don't understand. You're quite right. You study immunology for a living. So when people have been giving information, I think for the most part, it's gone over a lot of heads. And this is an opportunity to really, in terms of education isn't schooling. Education is about presenting both sides of the argument. I agree with Neville on that. It's about having both sides of the argument. I'm a big advocate for that, so that people make an informed decision. They don't just go with the one that the facilitator presents because that's how I feel about it. It's a bit like me, I would have the Labour Party in, wouldn't I? Because that's who I'm a member of. No, it's about having everybody in the room to have their part of the conversation. But going back to your point about the racism, I think it's, again, we've never been presented with both sides of the argument. Even if you look at the messages from central government, what they say. I sit on a forum where we have a member of SAGE that informs us every 2 weeks in terms of COVID, around policing and so on and so forth. So I get those messages directly myself. But again, it's not often in the language that an ordinary man or woman, regardless of race, would understand. And I think what COVID is also shining a light on is just how much of our society we've left behind in terms of these more societal discussions and conversations around things that affect everyday people. People don't understand. Who's taking the time to put on locally at their local doctor's surgery? We don't even have community centres anymore, but anywhere like that, centric to that locality, to say, come on down, what we're going to have is a scientist or whatever present in a way that we will understand. So when you leave, you'll have, you can ask the question. Nobody ain't doing that. Nobody has the time for that. So people feel rushed and coerced. We have a very abusive relationship in this country with institutions and structures and ordinary people. They don't talk to us. We don't talk to them. They want us to do things. We don't engage. And so it goes on. It's just recycled.
And that is counterproductive.
Exactly. It's counterproductive, especially in a pandemic when you want people to understand, look, this is your health at risk. Those of you who have diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, you smoke, all of these things, if you get this COVID, this pneumonia strain, listen, I lost a friend. I lost my mentor. right? Not through COVID, but for me, this has been a massive mortality check. In any case, a lot of people have just dropped off. Yeah, 8 people since the start of the year I've lost, some for COVID, some not. So for me, this is a time to start thinking about my health, about what I feed myself, my children. And what I would like to say is, for anybody listening, I think what needs to happen in the UK is that whilst we will look to the more conventional medicines, people need to also, you know, a bit like Maccabee, there also needs to be from the NHS a program where we start to look at educating people about their diet, about what they eat, you know, about what we put on our skin. All of these things for the long term will work out better for us as a nation because people be educated about their choices rather than being presented a fait accompli based on, you know, racial structure inequalities or whatever else. Educate the people, let them decide for themselves, but present to them both sides of the argument because we're not idiots, we're just not informed.
Thank you. I find that in terms of messaging, I think we missed the mark in a way. And Doc, I really follow American news. I read a lot. You know, might as well. I can just move over there, but I don't know everything. But I think we missed as professionals. We've missed it big time. The messaging. One of the first things, the idea that came to my head was when it came to the vaccine was there was this excitement about the vaccines. And I can imagine the excitement in medicine with the researchers and so on, you know, with yourself, the scientists and so on, about this new mRNA vaccines. But I don't think we were looking at the bigger picture because my question was, okay, come up with all the vaccines, but who's going to take them? We weren't looking at the end game. You know,
right, because you see,
so I think we really missed it.
Right. The doctors and scientists have never been very good at communicating with the public. Even when we write and we publish papers, they're reviewed by other scientists and we publish them for other scientists. Right? And essentially, if you don't get a good science writer who translate what you says in what you wrote into some other simplified article, the general public would never know that that was there, because when we are going through graduate school and postdoc work, that's not the way you're taught to write. You're not taught to write in a science communication manner. So you kind of have to take that in your own hands and break it down into simple form on social media. That's what your research says. I didn't get that from your papers, you know, and that's a part of the issue. So you're right. Education is important in this setup. So everybody who knew the implications of it were very excited.
Yeah.
While the general public is there trembling, saying, I hope you're not going to force me to take that, because I'm not ready to take that. And here's what my advice is. What we should do, we should continue education, but give it to the people who are comfortable enough to get it.
Yes.
Let those people take it, and then let them be the advocates in their community to say to other people, hey, I took it. My arm still works. I'm still able to walk. I'm still able to go out, and now I have this protection from the virus. I can interact with this other person who has this protection. Eventually, that's going to start happening, that people who are vaccinated are going to be allowed to do things that you might not have been able to do before. And when people see that, let them get to the place of comfort with this thing, because as Mr. Watson said, most of these people are not anti-vaxxers. They're not anti-vaxxers in the least. They're vaccine hesitant for a reason, something that they don't understand, something that happened in the past. Eventually, we'll get to that place. But until the world gets there, we will never get rid of coronavirus, because this virus is way too contagious and it has found way too comfortable a place to be in the human body to just pack up and leave and go on some distant journey. It's not going to leave us on its own. We have to stomp it out. And we have to stomp it out by good nutrition, as Donna has been saying, by social distancing, wearing our masks, washing our hands, and if we choose to, get the vaccine when it's available to you, whichever one you're comfortable taking. That's a good thing. There are over 60-something vaccines now in human trials. Sooner or later, the market is going to get flooded with more of these vaccines that show decent efficacy. And if you're concerned, here's the thing. The mRNA vaccine was completed quickly, but so did the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is a completely different platform. So if our argument is that these things should take all this time, how is it that we have another vaccine that's not this platform that we're uncomfortable with? It's a platform that has been tested and we have vaccines out there on, but they're also done. Why? Because we have a raging pandemic and you're able to complete clinical trials in a short time. So hopefully we will get to the point, maybe it's next year, maybe it's the year after, where people will be able to see that these vaccines actually work, they're safe, and we'll take them and protect us. Because until that time, you will be dealing with this virus. It's not going anywhere until it is stomped out.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. We're winding down just a couple of minutes and we'll finish off because we're going way over time. But it shows, how much people, are anxious about this and how many questions there are about this. And we haven't touched half of the questions yet. And, for centuries, there's always this complex relationship between religion and medicine, faith and science. And this often influences people's perception about their health and their health behaviors, their health-seeking behaviors. And we see this for something as simple as obesity, cancer, seeking help. Should I pray for medical treatment, or should I pray or take medical treatment? Now there's some clear division among churches, not churches, but religions, people of faith. We see some religious organizations making efforts. We see the Muslim using the mosque to get people in, turning them into vaccination centers. We see some churches are doing it. Now, given the split, this divide among the faith groups, how should church leaders engage their congregation, when it comes to the COVID vaccine? And do you think pastors should have responsibilities, or let me say church leaders should be responsible for or take some ownership to encourage people, especially within our culture, to take the vaccine? Is God not capable of giving scientists skills and knowledge to find cures for diseases? And should we just pray and wait for God to heal us, without any kinds of medical interventions? Are faith and science parallel? Or can there be some kind of mutualism between the two?
Yeah, very, very good question. I think pastors should do exactly what you're doing here. They should create a space to educate their members. I think taking a vaccine is an individual decision. But what a minister can do is that you can bring your congregation to a place of knowledge, to a place of information. You can make an effort to stomp out misinformation because it's out there and it's being transmitted within your church group. Most of the misinformation I've gotten about COVID and the vaccine, I've gotten from church members, right? And so here's the thing. Sometimes what our church folks forget is that they forget that some were given the gift of apostleship, some leadership, some healing. And a lot of times people wait for a miraculous healing when God has been sending them the healer repeatedly. An infectious disease is very different from a chronic disease that you might have, like diabetes. If you have diabetes, depending on the stage that you're in, and you change your diet and your lifestyle, you could reach to the place where you don't have to take insulin anymore. I've seen it happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've seen people change their diets, lose the weight, their blood pressure goes back to normal, their sugar levels go back to normal. That is never going to happen with an infectious microbe. And that's the thing that people don't get. Yes, your diet will improve your immune system, but you're not getting infected with COVID because your immune system is not good. You're getting infected with COVID because your cells have a receptor that this virus uses to enter. That's all it takes. And if you do not get the intervention that is needed, this is a disease that has the potential to kill you. This is true with the flu. It is true with salmonella. It is true with an E. coli outbreak. It is true with Ebola and Marburg and you name it. This is the idea. So the idea is for people to be educated, to understand that if you have a disease that's going to kill you, it would not be God's desire for you to die that way when there is an intervention. And people need to really start looking at that the intervention are people who God have blessed with the training, with the knowledge, and with the therapeutics that are designed to help you. I'm not saying every therapeutic is great, but there's always a risk versus reward, and you have to evaluate those. And that's why I don't feel it should be forced on anybody. You have to evaluate the risk of side effects, long-term, short-term side effects versus the reward that you're going to get from that therapy at a particular time.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm going to close off. Let me say to the audience, I thank you for staying with us. We're gone way over time, but thank you so much. And yes, we will try and rearrange another meeting because there's so much to talk about. There's so much anxiety, and and it's quite understandable as well. And it's okay to be anxious. It's okay to have the questions. And this is all about informing and educating and building awareness so you can decide. We don't want to impose any belief or belief system on you. I see somebody say the church should not be involved, but the church plays a very, very big role, massive role when it comes to things like these. So it's about informing you and equipping you with information for you to go and make your decision. So we're winding down. Just to ask final question to everybody. What would success look like? And what's the one thing you'd want to see change going forward? And what's the one thing? I know we've learned a lot, but what's one poignant thing you've learned since the pandemic has started? And what's the one thing you'd like to see change, whether it's societal, whether it's personal, going forward? Just to close off. Donna, I'll start with you. You're getting sleepy, Donna. I can see it.
No, I'm in a sleepy, I'm hungry. For me, the thing I've learned the most during this pandemic is how important, who knew that to be able to talk to people was a skill? And as a child of Jehovah's Witnesses, who spent my preeminent years knocking on people's doors, effectively cold calling, I didn't know that I had this transferable skill from being a child. So for me, obviously, we established our H&H platform. Before then, we were like in person to person, as most organizations were. But I think the fact that we deliver twice a week to the community, people like it, and we're having some real conversations. I think the government could do a worse thing than take a closer look at, we talk about community engagement. What does that look like? What does it entail? How do we get people to engage? How do you build that trust to find out what's actually going on in that locality for that demographic, for that class of human being? How do they feel? You have to talk to them. So that's one of the lessons that I've learned, how important it is to have a conversation. And if there was anything that I could change, I think that nights like tonight became part of our everyday existence. So not just because nobody hasn't got anywhere to go, and we've all learned to, even older people. My grandaunt in Jamaica in Old Harbour, even she knows how to come on and knows her way around Zoom. It shouldn't be that we have these conversations as peers, as community groups, as a people, just because. My hope would be that even when we do go past this type of forum and conversations continue, because we need it. We need the conversation, and we need the education, and we need the peer learning. Forget the education from on high, but actually we're sat here as a group of peers and we're educating one another, we're having the conversation, and that would be the thing I would hope will continue even after this pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Neville, final words. What's the one thing you've learned since the pandemic started? And what's the one poignant thing you'd like to see change going forward?
Well, the one thing I've learned, and it's something that's been with me for a while, but I think it's been more self-evident, is how it's not ever been about our wants, it's our needs. And that's the thing that I think that's really come home, how it's the things we often take for granted, the things that are around us, our nearest, our dearest, and people we love around us, and how important they are, and our friends and family. And I think that to me has become more apparent, I think. And I think lots of people will take that away, I suppose, as a takeaway from this. I think also we realize how, as a people around the world, how connected we are. You know, I think this has shown us all, regardless of who you are, what rank you are, what profession you are, what color, creed you are, how we're all affected. And, you know, when we say we are all brothers and sisters, you know, in Christ, under God, it is so true, because now we can see it, that we're all brothers and sisters, and we're all, what affects you over in America, you know, touches us here, and vice versa. So, you know, like you said, Donna, I think it's wonderful that we can use these platforms. And Eve, I just want to say thank you to you for facilitating this cross-Atlantic and cross-border. It's because obviously being in Croydon, Croydon, South London, that's like another world to us as well. So from those in Croydon and South London and North London and East London and across the Atlantic, and bringing us together this way. So I just thank you for that, and obviously for the guests that have come on and given their time. Because at the end of the day, as you rightly say, everyone's given some time to air their views. And, you know, sometimes, yes, if it comes across as a passion, I do listen, and I'm very good listening. But I feel strongly about certain things as well. We didn't get a chance to talk about my pet love, which was actually how we're going to find a solution out to this and what we should be doing now post lockdown, because I'm seeing amongst my school children and the impact it's having on them and families. And, you know, just to say this, that sadly, I said about how the impact in the home, but, you know, what we've seen sadly is the amount of people who now have divorces, and people have not made it through. Being at home as magnified maybe problems that were there before, but when you go out to work and you got 6 hours out the house, it's a different situation. So sadly, some people have fallen by the wayside. But like you, Donna, you know, 10 of my friends haven't, from March to today, will not see Easter as well. So it's for all, and we're all, I'm sure, for you, Dr. Webley, you have the same story. So you know what? We all recognize now what we are, one people. And sometimes we have to get past, and I know this may not always rub well, but I know we talk about Black people and inequality, but, you know, white people have been affected, Indian people have been affected. And I know that sometimes is not, but let's be honest with all of us, we all have been affected by this. So as a people, and I just say that to me is the thing that's come out, how connected and under one sky we are as a people. God bless you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And finally, Doc.
Yeah, I share exactly what Neville just shared. That one of the things that came home to me through this pandemic, you know, that we used to sing a little song, "It's a small world after all." And it really is. We, as you said, we're all under the same sky. We are definitely a global community. We're interconnected in more ways than we think. How quickly this pandemic traveled across the globe. And it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're Black or white, old or young, this thing has had an impact, either directly or indirectly, on us as a people. And so, you know, that really came home to me throughout this pandemic. And, you know, just to cap off, we talk about being a part of a family of faith, and I am too. And so, you know, in these presentations, sometimes I like to leave people with something that if you don't believe, it might not mean much to you, but if you do, hopefully it'll bring you comfort. And I think about 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7, where it says, "Cast all your anxiety, all your care upon him." Why? Because he cares for you. And then Joshua chapter 1 verse 9 says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And finally, 2 Corinthians 12:9. And this is one we know very well. He says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. We need to be there for each other. We need to be patient. Sometimes we're a little bit impatient. We need to be patient. As somebody who's a teacher for a living, I know that sometimes you have to go over the concept 100 times for different groups of people and for different levels of people to get it. And so we need to be patient with each other. We need to care more for each other. We need to truly be our brother's keepers in these tough times. And if there's anything that anybody should take away from this pandemic is there are things in this world that don't care who you identify with and where you identify. You're going to get affected. The virus doesn't care what your political affiliation is. It doesn't care what church group you belong to. It doesn't care what your skin color is. It's just going to infect you because you're there. And so hopefully this will bring, I'm not optimistic that we'll have a kumbaya worldwide, but hopefully when we get out of this, we will value each other more. We'll value a hug more. We'll value the opportunity just to touch somebody more. Yeah. And that when we say, how are you doing? We will actually stop and listen for the answer. And that when we shake a hand, there'll be emotion in it. That when we hug, it won't be that floppy hug that people do when they're being standoffish and uppity. It will be a true hug that says, I am truly glad to see you. And hopefully that will bring together people who haven't thought it necessary to come together before. Thank you so much, Eve, for facilitating this. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share this evening.
You're most welcome. And I want to just say thank you all. Donna, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Enough. Neville, thanks again for taking time out of your busy life. And Doc, from way across the pond, way across the Atlantic, thank you. I really appreciate things like these and for sharing. And it's there's one objective, just one objective, to inform, share, and empower people to help them make informed decisions about their lives and to help us as well. I haven't had it yet for obvious reasons. Come on now. But thanks a lot. And for the audience, my sincere apologies. I know I have not taken up all the questions. We're not ignoring them, but we have so much to talk about. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and arrange. I don't know what Dr. Webley's diary looks like. I know you're quite busy and Donna never, but I'll try and arrange another meeting and hopefully Dr. Garrick will be here. So we can get some serious clarity as well, but hopefully we're gonna have this again. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for engaging with us. H&H tomorrow night, people. Log into Donna on Facebook. Donna, what it stand for? Hard dough bread. What is it again? What is it?
It stands for harder bread and Horlicks. If you're from a certain place and a certain age, you know exactly what time it is. But that's what it stands for.
All right. So join Donna tomorrow night as a one-off. She's usually on a Thursday evening, but join her tomorrow night, Facebook Live, for her program H&H. All right. Dr. Webley, thank you so much again. Neville, thank you. And we hope to meet again. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon. God bless. Lovely night. Bye-bye.